Hello, everyone, and welcome to Elektor Engineering Insights again. I'm Brian Tristam Williams, and today we're talking all things retro computing with Adam Wilson, joining us today from the northeast of the UK. Adam, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Great, thank you. I've been looking forward to having you on. This is, of course, one of my favorite topics, and I brought some items for show and tell, as usual. For our audience joining us from around the world, and wow, this is a big audience, very popular topic. Just scrolling through the comments, I already see the word C64 in there somewhere. So let me tell you a bit about Adam first. He's an embedded systems engineer, and after gaining a Bachelor of Engineering in Electronic Engineering and an MSc in Digital Systems Engineering, he worked in marine power and automation and then product development for IoT and healthcare before returning to heavy industry roles. In his spare time, he pursues his passion for restoring vintage computers and electronics, covering 70s, 80s era machines, Acorn, Amiga, Atari, Apple, Sinclair, Commodore, and more. And his website, Adam's Vintage Computer Restorations, which I'll show you just now, documents his repairs, reverse engineering efforts, and collector's work. So on today's show, we'll take a look at how Adam applies modern hardware tools and embedded best practices to ancient machines, what we can learn from their design, and how he brings them back to life. And maybe during the show, I'll show you how I've taken worst practices and applied them to ancient machines and really screwed up when I was younger. And he's uniquely positioned at the crossroads of vintage computing and professional embedded systems engineering, which we're all about at Elektor. Now, I want to tell you about our giveaway. I can bring that up on screen. It's a book called Retronics. Put it up on the screen. It's a nostalgic collection of about 80 short stories, originally published in Elektor magazine between 2004 and 2012. It's written by our longtime editor, Jan Beiting. In fact, I have an Elektor from September 1990. That was the first one I ever bought, and Jan was the editor at the time. So the book celebrates the golden age of electronics through lively, sentimental tales about vintage test gear, early computers, quirky components, and classic Elektor projects. So rather than just following a timeline, each story stands on its own. So it's a mix of engineering, curiosity, humor, and affection for old hardware. Not computers in our case, as you can see by the cover, it goes back a little bit further in time, but still a retro is retro. So he goes from 1960s Tektronix oscilloscopes to a 1920s medical gadget. So you can see what that's about when you enter our competition. I will give you the code word later. But right now, let's move on to our sponsor. It is EE News Europe. And if you're looking for the latest electronics and engineering news, check out eenewseurope.com, which is an Elektor international media publication. EE News Europe is a fully digital publication covering the global electronics market with specializations in analog, automotive, embedded, power, smart 2.0, and wireless technologies. So read eenewseurope.com and subscribe to its newsletters to stay informed about essential industry news, key events, essential innovation. So there's the URL in the top, if you can see it, eenews.com. Okay, let's take that screen down. Well, let's leave the screen up actually just for a second. This is Adam's Vintage Computer Restorations. We'll come back to that. I spoke to Adam a bit about this a bit earlier, but let's start with Adam himself. Adam, have you always been drawn to retro computing?
It's a good question. To be honest, no. So I was born in 1995, so I'm actually only 30. Most of my machines, wow. Yeah, exactly. Most of my machines are older than I am. So I guess a lot of reasons people get into vintage computing tends to be from more of a nostalgia point of view. I don't really have that myself. What got me into vintage computing, interestingly, was, studying electronics. Vintage electronics was always really quite interesting, quite cool for me. But a couple of my friends actually inherited vintage computers from their family. And they actually had a little group where once a week they would get together. It was kind of a retro game night. So one of them had an Amstrad CPC 464 and a GT94 monochrome monitor, for example. Another one had an Acorn Electron. And to take part, of these kind of sessions, I thought, well, maybe I should get my hands on retro computer. The obvious choice, which was what I went with, was Commodore 64. So that was my first machine back in about 2018. My lovely girlfriend at the time, who is now my lovely wife, very kindly got me that machine. And then when I had it, it was fun to play on, but I started tinkering around with it, and I thought, oh well, I could get another one, and then one turned into two, and two turned into three, and so on, until I ended up building up quite a large collection, and then I ended up buying up broken ones and then fixing them and refurbishing them in order to sell to kind of cover my costs and the like. So it's brilliant for me because I get to learn about hardware and electronics and diagnostics. I get to work on really rather cool machines, and it's kind of a self-funding hobby for me, which is really nice. So I kind of offer services to people in my spare time, and any surplus machines that I get, I can kind of refurbish to sell. So it's a perfect deal, really.
Yeah, and I like your T-shirt over there.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, that's Commodore Basic specifically. My parents got me this one for Christmas last year, so I like to wear it.
Nice. Well, normally I wear a more formal Elektor shirt, but today I've decided to go in camouflage to this.
Fantastic.
And your wife tolerates your hobby? Doesn't get tired of it?
Yeah, I'd say tolerate is a good word. To be fair, I mean, she likes collecting things. She collects old audio tapes and toys and the like. So we're a bit of kind of partners in crime with it. So she does enable me quite a lot. Like she'll I think pretend to complain on one side, but then for example, for Christmas, she's always buying me broken things to a lot of my consoles that I've got set up here, which I'll show some pictures of in a little while. She very kindly has got me for birthdays and Christmases. She'll get them cheap on eBay because they're broken, and then I'll be able to kind of fix them up. So it kind of makes it extra special that way for me, because it's not just here's something that's probably quite expensive but working. It's nice to kind of be able to work on them as well and have that incentive to fix them up. So yes, we're two peas in a pod, I think.
Yeah, and that's nice thing about digital electronics. For the most part, you got no moving components. I'm useless at mechanical stuff, and one of the other things I collect is VCRs. And yeah, computer, you can just change the chips, or you can even re-engineer a chip. But when it comes to a belt or a pulley mechanism or some gear that I can't find, that's painful. Do you work much on mechanical stuff? I see you have a varied career.
Yeah, so not quite so much as other electronics, but as you say, a lot of particularly vintage electronics equipment is very much electromechanical. I worked on a VCR not too long ago that a colleague very kindly gave me, and luckily that was a power supply issue, so I managed to get that working again. But they are incredibly complex mechanical devices. It really is impressive with all the heads and the pulleys and the gear mechanisms and everything. They can be an absolute nightmare to try and diagnose from a mechanical point of view. So I would say that's one area I could do with some more experience, but through, I guess, my work on old computers, particularly those with floppy disk drives and hard drives and the like, there is quite a mechanical element as well. Particularly when I volunteer at our local repair cafe as well, which I do once a month, which is a very interesting kind of initiative, which has grown a lot, which is very good to see, where members of the public are encouraged to bring along broken household items. There tends to be white goods that I do. I volunteer as electrical. And typically there's a lot of mechanical aspects there as well, because there's a lot of motors and the like. So yes, but I find diagnosing particularly analog and digital electronics far easier than diagnosing mechanical or electromechanical systems that can be very tricky.
Yeah, and VCR repair courses are hard to come by these days.
I
So what I
bet, yeah.
tend to do is, if I have a decent machine but it doesn't work, I tend to buy more just like it for spares, knowing that they'll be rarer in the future. And
Yes.
maybe one day when I retire, I will learn how to fix these things. But for now, I'm glad to be talking digital retro with you. I can't believe you were born in 1995. I mean, I was always into retro computers, but the caveat is when I first got them, they weren't retro, they were state of the art. And slowly but surely they crept into the classical, then the vintage. I'm thinking Back to the Future Part 2, where he visits Cafe 80s. That was made in 1989, but it was supposed to be in 2015, and they had an Apple Mac, I think maybe a Lisa, in the shop window, which was a vintage computer, and that really came to pass. So, Adam, you showed me some horrifying pictures earlier, and amazing restorations that you did with them. I think you should show our audience, but you'll have to share your Chrome window.
Absolutely,
while you do that.
Absolutely.
While you do that, I'll just greet the audience, and the audience will greet you. Gerhard School says, "Hi, Adam. I hope school is correct pronunciation. Bonjour from Clermont-Ferrand. I hope I'm pronouncing that too." And then people are shouting out with their favorites. There's someone from Buda, Netherlands, Stuttgart, Germany. Paul Kitching says, "Hi, Adam." And apparently Paul is just around the corner from you, even though there are people all around the world. Cayman Islands is in the house. Vienna, Austria. Guyana, the Netherlands. Gloucestershire. Sunderland, UK. But I'm not going to read all cities in the world. Frank De Hart is a regular viewer of the show. He's shouting out to the Junior computer, and that's from Elektor, or Elektor if you're Dutch, and the Atari ST. That's one I never got my hands on, the Atari ST. I did like the Atari 800 and 600 XLs, but the Atari XT was the music computer in the 80s. What else we got? C64 and Amiga from Finland. And here's an unusual one, the Auric Atmos from Spain. What's that, a Z80? You would know, Adam.
I think it is it's an 80 base, that, isn't it? I've got an Auric 1 myself. I don't use it very much, but it's a neat piece of kit. Paul, yes, what is local to me is a friend of mine, actually. I've worked on a Mac SE30 and an Amiga 1200 for him before, so yeah, which is nice to see. And Will as well in the Cayman Islands. I'll mention Will a little bit later on, but Will has been absolutely fantastic in helping me out with my Macintosh SE30 repair. It's been absolutely invaluable, so would very much like to give Will a big shout out. What his company is KMac Vintage, who actually specialise in Mac digital board repairs and swaps. So his knowledge was invaluable to help me out. So, but yes, I've got some pictures lined up actually, ready whenever to talk about those.
Awesome, and thanks, Will, for helping Adam, which in turn helps us in the community. We've got some nerdy wishes from Gratz in Austria. What else we got? Oh, speaking of around the corner, Peter Buerta from South Africa. Around the corner from me somewhere. It's a big country, but he's somewhere here. Mike Luca says ZX80, 81, Spectrum QL. Next. Interesting, some of those are quite rare, but some of them are quite common.
Yeah, absolutely. I've not had a ZX80 myself. I've had loads of ZX81s and Spectrums, but never ZX80. So that'd be an interesting one to come across.
Yeah. Motorola 6800 D2 kit in a homebrew system, running 4th. Oh, nice. And speaking via Texas Instruments Speak and Spell. That's one I don't have in the room with me, but I've got a couple of Speak and Spells and a Speak and Math. I take out the Speak and Spell whenever we watch E.T. with the kids.
Brilliant.
Scotland, NASCOM 2-in-1 BBC Micro. That's another one. I always wanted the BBC Micro, but never got it. Atari ST, ZX81, Commodore 64, and Amiga 500. I don't remember the difference between the ZX80 and the ZX81, but I do remember some of my friends had a ZX80 or 81 in the early 80s, and yeah, even though I think it was a black and white display, it was just so magical just to type something and get it to pop up on the screen. Okay, now you're just showing off Grant 6809 wire wrap board. another one, MCS Beta, a German Kim clone.
Oh,
We can talk about all of these later, Adam, but I'm just going to put them out there for now. TRS-80, popular in America. I've never seen one in real life.
I've worked on a Model 3 for a chap quite local to me in Sunderland, actually. That was an interesting, very interesting repair.
And did you have much of those in the UK back in the day?
No. So TRS-80 machines and other kind of Tandy Radio Shack machines, as far as I'm aware, weren't big sellers in the UK at all. So that was the first Tandy machine I'd ever actually worked on, and since then it's been the only one. I think in particular as well with the Model 1, 2, 3 and the like being such large chassis, it's rarer for them to, I guess, survive, and especially survive in good conditions. So that was that's so far the only one I've seen in person. But a cool piece of kit, very nice.
Cool. And then the VIC-20, of course, one of my best friends had one when I was a kid. It came with a free cassette tape of some games. I think one of them was called Blitz, and it was an airplane that flew over the city and dropped bombs.
Classic Blitz.
And I got obsessed with that. I've still got that tape, by the way, somewhere in my cupboard.
I was never any good. I'm no good at Blitz, unfortunately. I always lose.
Philips P2000T, that sounds familiar.
That's interesting.
It's giving me MSX files, but I don't think it was an MSX. I'll just show my... Yeah, it looks familiar. Never used one. I remember them from the magazine ads. CPC, I guess that's Amstrad 464.
I think so, yes, yeah.
And then, of course, the Sharp MZ80K.
Those are nice machines. You had to have one of them.
Let me Google that. Remind myself. Yes.
Yeah.
The keyboard looks a bit difficult to. Looks a bit difficult to type on the keyboard because it's all laid out nice and neatly.
Yeah. Nice machine.
I was just going to do a few shout-outs, but this is such a popular topic. Our audience is not stopping. Richard says that Adam repaired his TRS-80 model.
Hey, Richard's online. Fantastic. Hi, Richard. Yes, it was Richard's TRS-80 Model 3 that I worked on. I say yes. That's a brilliant piece of kit.
Then, of course, Commodore 128. I borrowed one once, and it came with some software on the disk, but it was mostly blank. So I decided to record my own programs on the disk. Turns out they had a thing called track disks, which I wasn't aware of. So I overwrote his game software. It was hidden.
I rather like the Commodore 128. Those are quite hard to come by in the UK as well. Really? I've had the kind of the standard all-in-one keyboard style 128, but also the D as well. So like the desktop with separate keyboard and then a 1084 CRT monitor. That was a very nice setup, but tricky to get going. Built-in 1571 dual-headed floppy disk drive, which was also tricky to get going right. But yes, that was nice. What was interesting to me about that one is the independent digital video out and composite video out at the same time. Yes. It's got RGBI on board as well, I think, doesn't it? Which is that's very very nice. 1480 column display as well. The Commodore 128 is a very impressive machine, actually. It's even got, I think it's got 3 CPUs in it. It's got a 6510 for Commodore 64 compatibility, and then I think an 8510 for just Commodore 128 basic, and it's also got a Z80 to run CPM as well. So it's really really an impressive piece of kit.
Cool. Well, there are so many comments here, but we better jump into it because we've into the show. I really appreciate the audience being so enthusiastic about all these systems from 8080 to Z80 to 6502. But Adam, tell me some of your horror stories from the battlefield. I'll put up your screen now.
Okay, so this is my most recent horror story. I've had a few of them, to be fair, but this in particular is I decided to pick up a Macintosh SE30 untested on eBay, which is always a bit hit and miss. You can get machines cheaply sold as seen, but they will usually bite you, which I've learned in the past. The Mac SE30 is particularly collectible and desirable because it's the fastest of the compact Macs. It's got a 32-bit data bus, unlike the later machines like the Mac Classic and the Classic 2. It's got a fast, full 68030 CPU, and you can run up to 128 meg of RAM on them. So they are a very, very powerful machine. So this one, from the outside, looked not too bad. The Samazimac style lines on the screen is a very common failure mode for a lot of classic Macs. Usually it can be as simple as replacing the SMD electrolytic capacitors on the digital board, for example. But in this case, sadly, it wasn't quite so lucky, which you can see on the down here, all of this corrosion. So that's first looks inside the machine. You can see how dirty it is first off. Usually that's not too much of a problem, but that corrosion and all of that dust kind of starts ringing alarm bells, you know. And then this is what the main board looked like, unfortunately, when I ended up pulling the main board out. So classic Macs or kind of compact Macs typically have a battery-backed PRAM for settings for date and time and the like. And they've got a lithium battery on board, Maxwell lithium battery, and they're known to leak and cause all manner of issues. And this in particular is one of the worst leaks I've personally seen. We've seen a few machines destroyed, but this one in particular, yeah. So that's on the face of it. Looks pretty horrible. Cleaned up, it's not quite so bad, but you can see the trace damage in particular around, well, particularly under where the battery holder was, and also the damage to the RAM multiplexer ICs, the F258s there. So I spent a bit of time trying to repair the board. These are very fine traces, and due to the corrosion, it's very kind of hard to get any kind of purchase on the existing solders. So in the end, I thought it would actually be potentially quicker and more reliable to actually just move to a new main board. So Ollie has actually reverse engineered the Macintosh SE30 mainboard, which along with some other supporters, which is a huge amount of effort, and an absolutely fantastic project like this is genuinely a wonderful piece of engineering, because there are so many issues with these kind of compact Macs, SE30 in particular. There was actually a community warrant to need a replacement board. So you can actually go to your favorite PCB manufacturer and you can actually buy one of these boards. Will from KMac very kindly sold me one of his spare boards. That's this one. And then I've begun the arduous task of relocating all of these surface mount and through-hole parts from the original board onto the new board. Didn't take too long, to be honest. It was rather therapeutic. It's nice, you know, you can just sit, put some music on and hot air stuff off, put them on the new board. But the problem is that I didn't know what worked and what didn't from the old board, because the old board didn't work. So I spent the better part of, it's been 2 years on and off trying to get this system to work. So here's the board with all the components swapped over. That's what it looks like now. I've also taken the opportunity to upgrade it to 128 meg of RAM. And this is the machine afterwards. So if you remember how messy it was previously, basically dismantled everything, cleaned everything up, serviced the analog board as well, because in particular some electrolytic capacitors, particularly when they're getting hammered on the horizontal output of the drive for the CRT as well, are typically best to replace them, in my opinion anyway, for reliability moving forward. I also pulled out the original. It had a quantum mechanical hard drive. I think it was a 20 megabyte hard drive, the original, replaced that with a blue SCSI SD card adapter. So nice and reliable, nice and fast. And I've got system 7.5.1 installed on there at the moment. So it's all working happily back together, but it's been a very long journey to get there. And I've actually, this is the original board with all the parts removed off it. I've actually got that framed here in my office as a kind of, I've got that here. It's a reminder not to buy Classic Macs sold as seen on eBay. So that's what.
And you removed all those parts yourself?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. To be fair, I think pretty much everything there was removed to swap over to the new board. But I do like. Well, I end up getting a lot of scrap parts, including boards, including ICs, and I don't like throwing them away. I think they are very interesting pieces of engineering in and of themselves, and they can be extremely decorative. So, for example, I've got a Sinclair ZX Spectrum main board here as well. It's an issue 2 main board that came from an irreparable machine, if I can show that. So just, I mean, all of the kind of the hand-drawn traces on these are absolutely beautiful. And then this one up behind me, this one's actually a Commodore 64, for example, as well. And then these are some of the ICs from a Commodore 64 too. So these are actually dead chips, but there's a full chipset there. Main chips anyway, RAM, multiplexers, CIAs, CPU, VIA, ROMs, that kind of, VIC for video. So, but yes, I'm very pleased with the way that the Mac turned out. It could have been a lot, well, I say, it couldn't have been much worse, but I might not have got it working. So there's that.
Yeah. And I promised to share some of my stories about how not to do things. And probably someone's going to shoot me when I show them this, but let me go to my spare camera. So this is my Texas Instruments TI-99-4A. That's the first computer I ever had. Got that in 84. This is not the original one because that one broke, and I decided to do what you did. I wanted to take this motherboard, take out all the components, and make an art piece out of it. So that's most of the motherboard. I have since removed the CPU, 16-bit, 64-pin. One of the ROMs is gone, and that's the video chip. But I was a teenager, so please forgive me. It was before you were born, Adam. I heard that if you heat up the entire board, you can easily remove all the components. So I stuck the board in the microwave oven and ended up with that.
No.
So that wasn't a good.
Wow.
That didn't work well.
It looks nice, to be honest. I mean, it's an
You reckon that looks nice?
Well, yeah.
As a 3D art piece.
I guess it depends on your definition of the term nice, doesn't it? But yeah.
Yeah. And then later on in life, much later on, I got a soldering iron and a solder sucker, you know, the vacuum sucker thing. And I managed to get closer to what you've achieved with that's the TI-99-4A main board. But it's still a bit rough around the edges due to soldering irons. So now I'm considering getting one of these digital desoldering stations like we have at Elektor, something like that. Mm-hmm. And maybe do an even better job. So yeah, I'm glad that someone appreciates the art of it as well.
Absolutely, yes, yeah, no, very interesting. The ZD915 is the exact desoldering station I personally use in my shed as well, so I definitely recommend that. For the price as well, they're really quite cheap, but yeah, no, they're fantastic pieces of kit. The guns have a habit of getting jammed up, but they're quite, if you look after it, they'll look after you. But yes, if we're talking about interesting repairs, I've got another machine that I can share my screen for, but this is actually a Commodore 64 that I don't microwave my computer, so that's a good one, Paul, actually, yes. I've got this is a Commodore 64 that I bought, sold as seen on eBay as well, which was just a case of I put it in the loft. You know, it worked when it went away. So is Elena okay to put my shared screen onto the?
Sure, let's bring it up.
Perfect. Yes. So this is the inside of a Commodore 64 that I bought, sold as seen on eBay, which was apparently working when it went in the loft or whatever. It's a very common one. I guarantee that it wouldn't have worked when I went up there, but I guess it's what you get when you buy stuff sold as seen. From the face of things, it really doesn't look bad at all. The eagle-eyed amongst you might notice that it's actually got an 8500 CPU from the later Commodore 64, so like the 64C era, which has a 1990 date code versus kind of 83 for all the other chips. It doesn't look badly installed, but this is what the back of the board looked like.
Wow.
So someone had actually drilled out, you can just about see the drill holes there, all of the wires on the original CPU, and then actually wired in individual, and it wasn't even good quality wire or good soldering or anything. Like, half of these had fallen off. There was no way this would ever work realistically. So someone had a good go of it, but just goes to show that if you use the correct tools in the first place, then, you know, with a desoldering station, like a decent one, that would take about 30 seconds to remove that chip probably, and do a very nice job of it with absolutely no damage to the board whatsoever. But this, someone's paid the price here. I mean, how long would it have taken someone who doesn't have the skills to remove a 40-pin DIP IC to painstakingly go through and individually solder each one of these wires? It's impressive, really. I admire the person's dedication, to be honest. I really do. But yeah, that's one of the horrors that I've seen.
Yeah, and even to remove a 40-pin or 64-pin IC using a solder sucker one leg at a time doesn't always work that neatly either. You always get some snags, and it's difficult. So yeah, these wires, like you say, admire the dedication. But I must thank you for your recommendation, because I've been asking ChatGPT for all kinds of desoldering station recommendations. And if you say you use the ZD915, then that's the one to go for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I've got the Duratool D00672 or something like that, but it's the basically just rebrand of the same. I think it's just a clone of it. So I've been using them for about 5 years, and they're superb. Honestly, that's one of the tools that's really changed my game, my rework game. Is previously, particularly on working on boards which, like the Commodore 64, for example, it can be a little fragile, older boards, and more valuable boards as well. If I suspected that a DIP IC was bad, I'd probably cut it out, particularly like the PLA chip on the Commodore 64, for example. Kind of a few years ago when I first started and didn't have the desoldering station, I wouldn't risk the board. As you say, solder suckers can be a bit fiddly for larger chips. So, but that's obviously sacrificing a chip, potentially an expensive chip, on a whim. So you've got to be very sure that you are actually replacing the right chip then. Otherwise you've broken a good chip for no reason. Whereas desoldering station, it's one of the best. That and a decent oscilloscope are absolutely the best investments I've ever made, I think. Really, really, really changed the quality of my work, the speed of my work. It's absolutely brilliant.
Awesome. And I see you've got the chipset behind you. Are those working chips? Because I've been looking at stuff on eBay and AliExpress and stuff. For example, there's a chipset for a TMS 9900 computer. Do you ever? Yeah.
This set here, those are all bad chips. So they've all been pulled by myself from, I guess, broken boards, but broken boards that have been fixed by their removal. I've got piles of ICs that I've pulled from old computers or bought. So these ones are unserviceable, sadly. I did have someone once. I used to sell some of my frames because they're very nice decorative items, but I used to sell them on eBay. And I had somebody buy a TED chip. There was a frame TED and CPU for the Commodore 264 series, which are both notoriously unreliable. So I had quite a few of them. But I found them up, sold them on eBay. And then in a frame, specifically saying this is for display purposes only, these known bad ICs. The buyer had pulled them out and tried to put them into the computer and said, I want to return these, they don't work. And I'm like, yeah, I told you that. I wouldn't put them in a frame if they work because they'd be worth 10 times as much money. So, yeah.
Yeah. Got a recommendation from Gerhard saying he's very satisfied with the desoldering pistol Hakko FR301. Now, I Googled it, $719. That is quite the price. Adam, any experience with something like that?
I've never used anything that fancy, I'm afraid. Although, to be fair, I think I'm pretty sure Mr. Carlson's lab on YouTube, I'm sure that's the type of kit that he uses, and it looks like a breeze. So I think the problem with the Duatool ones that I use, again, the guns have a habit of getting blocked up, whereas I think those Hakko ones, because everything's kind of integrated into the gun itself rather than having a larger standalone unit, like a base unit, and then the gun, I think they tend to be more reliable. But that is, I think if you're a professional and you want to invest that much in your tools, then absolutely. But for me, where it's more of a hobbyist thing, I wouldn't be able to invest that kind of money in a tool for the amount of work that I do, I'd say.
Yeah, and it would depend on the scope of work that it can do. If it's purely for through-hole components, well, I can't tell, I'm not an expert, but these days we're moving more and more to surface mount, heating plates, that sort of thing, heat guns. Love to have the proper tools, but if you can't justify the cost, that's another story.
Yes,
Renee Bosch reminding us of erasing the EEPROM with the UV lamp. Done that. How about you, Adam?
Yes, I've got an EEPROM eraser, UV EEPROM eraser, and I've actually got some. I've got quite a lot of test gear. I'll share my screen with some pictures of my test gear actually, but so I've got quite a large collection. This is some of my collection, for example. But there's quite a lot of vintage computers, consoles, and particularly test gear as well. So I do really like my vintage test gear, including old school EEPROM programmers and actually old school EEPROM UV erasers as well. So it's got quite a big kind of UV fluorescent tube in it, which is quite nice. But yes, I always keep quite a large stock of EEPROMs, and I've got an EEPROM programmer kind of ready to go for anything that needs it. Some older machines aren't directly pin compatible with more modern EEPROMs and EEPROMs, unfortunately, but it's usually pretty easy to whip up an adapter to get them to work. For example, old Commodore 5¼ disk drives, the ROMs in those are usually particularly unreliable, so it's nice to be able to, you can buy PCBs to do it as well, but when I've done it in the past, you can also just wire in. For testing, you can kind of wire bridges manually and things using sockets, which is what I've done.
Yeah.
I've also got, I was mentioning about some of my consoles earlier as well. So I've actually got, to my right here in my office, I've got quite a nice setup of consoles that primarily my wife's bought for me, sold as seen on eBay to fix up. I've got a Laserdisc player as well. I've got quite a large Laserdisc collection now, which is a really interesting physical medium. So
which player is that?
It's a CLD 995. Oh, is it 95D? I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a Pioneer player, so they're quite they're pretty high quality machines.
Yeah, my first one was a Pioneer. Again, before you were born, CLD 3390. Got it in about 1991 or 1990.
Fantastic. But yes, some of the consoles here, for example, is the Sega Saturn, which was a particularly difficult repair because it actually had trace corrosion on one of the. It's actually got dual CPUs there, so it's a very powerful piece of equipment, particularly for the time, and actually had trace corrosion on one of the CPUs, a very, very, very fine pitch, but I managed to fix that up with a microscope, thankfully. I'll get a picture of that up actually out of interest in a sec. But yeah, Saturn's a nice piece of kit. I enjoy playing on it. Okay. I'll have a picture in 1 second.
And trace corrosion not caused by a battery this time?
Thankfully not, no. It kind of looked like, so this is actually, I've got a USB microscope, which is quite a, very handy piece of kit. That didn't set me back too much money. But you can kind of see the pitch on the ICs, and there was just a little bit of blue-green corrosion, which I think might have actually been, excuse me, factory contamination. But you can actually see, you can just see two little breaks there. So I managed to get some wire on those. You can barely see it even on the microscope, to be honest. I wish I'd taken a screenshot on the microscope itself rather than taking a picture. But given that that's kind of a standard size wire there, that was tricky.
Crazy.
That was tricky. I really had to psych myself up to do that one. That was pretty tough.
I didn't realize how small it was until you said it's a standard size wire.
Yes, yeah. So in comparison to yes, absolutely teeny tiny. So I managed to get two little. My enameled wire, my finest enameled wire was actually too thick for it. So I had to use single strands of a stranded wire. You could barely. It wasn't quite as small as like mobile phone repair wire. It's incredible how people can work with that because I can't even see it with my eyes. But that was very fine. So I was pleased with that when that because it was a black screen originally, which can be simple, can be really not simple. In this case, it wasn't simple at all. I was very pleased when the machine just kind of started up into life after doing that. I'll see if I can get a picture as well of. So this is what it looks like kind of by eye. I think that was 0603 components there, and you can just about see there those little breaks. That's with some of the copper kind of scratched back. But here's what the corrosion actually looked like originally. And the rest of the machine didn't seem to have been contaminated at all. And it's not like this was within. I mean, it's got a big metal RF shield over the top of this main board, so it's not like it's open to the elements. So it's not like on older systems like the Mega Drive, for example, where you quite often get trace issues around the cartridge slot because people, kids like pour drinks and stuff into it, or it gets dirty and dusty. I'm honestly not sure what this was, other than if it could have been factory contamination.
Very localized.
Extremely, yes, exactly. Like it's not like if there was a big patch or there was any obvious kind of liquid damage or anything, but no, there was nothing. It's just that, and it seemed to be quite aggressive as well, whatever it was. So, but yeah, I'm very pleased to have the Saturn working because that could have been a hard one. This is my electronics workshop that I've got set up in my shed as well. Desoldering stations just kind of to the right here. You can't actually see it in the photo, unfortunately, but it's kind of got pretty much everything I need because it's quite a small space. I've got to try and use that space very, very carefully. Hence, it's all really quite organised with all my component storage and the like. And because it's a small shed in it, we we've got a relatively small house. I've got to share it with things like the lawnmower and things like the tumble dryer and the like. So, but I'm very lucky to have it. I really like my shared workshop.
Yeah, and you're certainly talented at packing, because from your photographs, it doesn't seem like such a small space. But I see your IBM, is that the 5151?
It's it's 5151 and the 5160 that I've been working on quite recently as well. That's a very cool piece of kit. I've got some more pictures of that if you would like to have a chat about that at some point.
Yeah, sure. It's one of the ones I always wanted. I have played around with one, but back in the early 80s, that was a business machine. They were hugely expensive.
Yes.
My theory is, I may be incorrect, but my theory is the PC took over the home market because of hand-me-downs from the office eventually.
Makes sense, yes, yeah. This one's interesting. I bought it. I mean, you can see Yorkshire Microcomputers based in York and Scarborough. So this was a pretty local Facebook Marketplace pickup for me. We don't really have many IBM PCs in the UK, as far as I'm aware. It's not like the US and North America where they sold in much higher volume. Over here, they were still extremely expensive, maybe even more so, but they are far fewer and far between. I actually went to university at York. I lived there for 4 years, and it's about an hour and a half's drive away. So I thought, brilliant, this was a good price. I hadn't seen one in this good nick on Facebook Marketplace ever, really. So I drove to go and pick it up. Came with the absolutely gorgeous original mechanical keyboard, which is an absolute dream to type on. It's kind of like sliding capacitive plates. So it's sprung. It's this slide spring mechanical. So it's not quite like the Commodore 64 where it's got a PCB and then a plunger that kind of makes contact with it, because those still feel really nice. This is very, very, very smooth. Even came with documentation and discs as well. Solder scene, as always, because I like solder scene. And it had been on a farm for the past something like 40 years. It had been left in like a barn on a farm. First things first was, for me, the IBM PC is pretty notorious for having mains filter caps in the power supply. So, in particular, Reefer brand, so they're metallized paper film capacitors, which as they age, they dry out, they become, they start to pass DC, they become resistive, and they have a habit of failing short and billowing out very acrid smoke. It's the same on the BBC Model B, for example, like the BBC Micros. So with the IBM PC, BBC Model B, quite a few other sort of $15,000, wow. And other machines that have those kind of mains filter capacitors, including some compact Macintoshes as well. It's always a case of service the power supply first, unless you want to have a smoke bomb go off in your house. It shouldn't damage the machine if it does, but it's really not nice. I've had them blow up before. It's not a nice surprise. So in this case, it was pull the power supply out first before testing everything. So this is what the power supply looked like. It's got a 220 volts, so it's like mains AC fan on it, which are extremely loud, and the bearings had gone on it. It was grumbly. It really wasn't very nice. So I decided to kind of overhaul the power supply. So what it looks like inside. It's a rather advanced power supply, to be honest, for the time. It's kind of a hybrid linear and switch mode power supply. It uses similar voltage rails to the original ATX standard. So it's an XT style power supply, which kind of lent itself later on to the more standard PC ATX power supply. So plus or minus 5 volts, plus or minus 12 volts. And I decided, which is a bit of a controversial decision. I can see why some people wouldn't, but I can see why I would. I actually put the guts out an AT power supply into it. So this still has all the voltage rails that are required at the, the current ratings that are required, but adds a bit more modern reliability, and runs cooler, and still allows you to kind of use the same case, which was nice. So, and doesn't have reefer mains filter capacitors in it. So basically, it's reversible. But so I've kept the original parts, but I basically put the bits out for PC power supply that I knew worked kind of into it. So more efficient now. And then also installed a 12-volt cooling fan on it now, which is absolutely whisper quiet and moves quite a lot of air versus the original mains fan. The next issue, once I booted everything up with a new power supply, new power supply worked first time, which was brilliant. The system booted up. Actually, I'll tell you another thing I did as well. I replaced all the tantalum capacitors on the main board first, because after watching videos from Adrian's Digital Basement and the like, because he works on a lot of PC, ATs, XTs, the tantalum electrolytics on the main board have a habit of failing short, so I replaced all the tantalum electrolytic capacitors in the system before starting up as well, stop them shorting out. Then when I tested the new power supply, everything started up except the hard drive didn't spin up. So this is actually the hard drive out of the machine. In my little finger, I've got a 512 gigabyte SD card versus the 10 megabyte 5¼ inch hard drive. I managed to diagnose it as a faulty Xena diode. Xena diode had fell short on the motor drive circuit, so the spindle motor wasn't running. When I managed to get it running again, it was extremely loud, but it did actually work. The system booted into, I think it was IBM DOS 2.0. So I managed to, here's an actual picture of the inside of the hard drive as well. Because at first I wasn't sure whether it wasn't spinning up because the heads might have been stuck, for example. It's quite common for the heads to stick onto the disk platters themselves and to potentially cause damage. But you can actually see here the heads are perfectly free and could be manually stepped. And also the disk surface looks absolutely perfect. But in terms of the inside of the drive, again, we were talking about electromechanical equipment earlier. Hard drives absolutely baffle me. They're truly incredible piece of kit. Absolutely wonderful. But yes, managed to get the hard drive working, and then decided to back that up because it was impractical. It was loud, probably unreliable because I didn't know how long it would last for, even after I'd repaired it. And it's quite small. I decided to move to an XTCF card, so like an ISA card with a compact flash card on it. And then throughout the process of that, managed to install IBM DOS 3.0 onto the system using a 3.5 inch floppy disk drive. The 5¼ inch floppy drive, I managed to get it working. It was primarily mechanical lubrication and kind of fettling required for that. But I didn't have any 5¼ inch system disks for later versions of DOS. So I decided to plug in a 3.5 inch drive and an adapter, and then I could very easily read and write 3.5 inch drives, so disks from my Windows 10 PC, modern PC. So that was nice, and then install all the kind of software that I wanted to. And then with the machine back together, I did a few other things like fitted a coprocessor, an 8087 coprocessor, updated the BIOS, which was a case of erasing and flashing some EEPROMs, upgraded to a Hercules compatible graphics card as well, which was nice, so just quite a bit crisp on the monochrome display. And also added a battery-backed real-time clock as well, which is nice rather than having to enter the date and time every time the system boots. And then I stripped and cleaned the mechanical keyboard as well, and then kind of everything back together. It's all working very nicely. So yeah, that's definitely one of my favourite machine setups at the moment is my 5160. Very nice piece of kit.
Amazing. And that disk drive as well. Very familiar with that because for some reason the Texas Instruments computer that came out in 1979 used a compatible disk drive. Now the PC only came out in 81, but for some reason these full height drives here on the, I think you've lost my window. The full height drives on the right hand side there, they were standalone at the time, and yeah, this was daisy chain system, so it got longer and longer.
That's fantastic. A real tower.
For some reason, the PC used the same drives, and these were single-sided, single density, so they were one side and 90 kilobytes on a disk. I just did the math because you were talking about that hard drive. 90 kilobyte floppy diskettes, you could store about 6 million of them on a micro SD card. So about a small home or a shipping container on that. But because those drives, even up to 360 kilobyte, double-sided, double density, was still compatible with the TI, I collected them. So now I have a whole box, like a paper box, 5 reams of paper, full of half-height 360K floppy drives. I wonder if they're worth anything.
Probably. I imagine so. It would certainly be of use to people.
I'm not a buyer and seller, though. I'm a buyer and hoarder, probably much like yourself. Adam, normally about halfway through the show, I go to the giveaway, but I didn't want to interrupt your flow. It's been so interesting. I wonder what your appetite is for staying a bit longer than the hour.
Absolutely, I'm happy to stay on as long as you need me. I'll probably be having me tea in a couple of hours. Aside from that, I'm good to go.
Awesome. So for our audience, I will drop in the code word for the giveaway so you don't miss anything. If you do have to leave, if you plan to just spend this hour with us, of course, this will be recorded. So wherever you're watching it now, you can watch it later. And Adam's been very gracious and kind enough to spend a little bit extra with us. So let me go to the giveaway. As I said, we have a giveaway of this Retronics book. Electronics going back to before the 80s and potentially as far back to the 20s. And the code word for today would be retro. Why not? Nice and easy. And the giveaway URL, as always, Elektor-engineering-insights-giveaway. You can put it up on the screen. There we go. So the code word is retro. So for those of you entering, good luck. I hope you enjoy that book. Looks very interesting. I wonder what they meant by medical device in quotes. Now I'm curious. Mm-hmm. Okay, now Adam, I need your expertise. First, I want to say snap. I'm going to switch to my camera here. Snap, there's Commodore 64, and looking inside, this one is surprisingly little corrosion here, because I know if somebody puts a fingerprint on them 20 years later, it's like it's ingrained into the metal. So I'll put that aside because I'm going to ask your professional opinion on something else, also Commodore related. This is the Amiga 500. I'll probably have to zoom out for this. Very big, much heavier than I remember from back in the day. Zoom out. But it has a famous problem when you put in an expansion board, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, Adam. My screwdriver. This expansion board here had a battery, and I was warned about it, so I did remove the battery, but I haven't done anything further with it. But as you can see, there is corrosion. There it is. And if I wanted to take care of this, what would my first steps be?
Okay, good question. Thankfully, I've had a few A501 RAM boards that have had similar kind of battery leakage. Thankfully, on those, it's primarily a ground and power plane underneath the battery, so there aren't any small traces typically running around the area. First off, I usually give things a spray down with white vinegar and a good scrub with a toothbrush. The NICAD PRAM battery on the A501 for the real-time clock leaks an alkaline substance, so can neutralize that with it's a weak alkali, but over time it's enough to cause that kind of corrosion. So you can neutralize that with a weak acid, so a bit of white vinegar. White vinegar I typically use because it doesn't smell too bad, it doesn't really leave residue. I've worked on so many battery leakage repairs now. Usually it's kind of bigger boards like the Acorn Archimedes, for example. But good spray with white vinegar, good clean with a toothbrush. I usually actually wash it down with distilled water as well. And then I usually blow all the water off it with I've got a kind of an air duster. So rather than using cans of compressed air, I've got an electric air duster, which is kind of like a vacuum cleaner but in reverse. So gives out quite. If you've got an air compressor or the like as well, that's kind of ideal.
I have canned air.
Canned air will do it as well. Yeah, and then blow all the water out, particularly from underneath the ICs, and then kind of leave the boards ideally somewhere warm to kind of dry out. If there is, I'll see if I can get some pictures up of similar kind of battery repairs that I've done actually. I had an Amiga 500 plus, well, I have an Amiga 500 plus, which rather than having the A501 RAM expansion in the trapdoor, it's kind of on board. So the Amiga 500 plus has onboard real-time clock and onboard 1 megabyte of chip RAM as well, which is equivalent to the Amiga 500 with the A501 expansion. And thankfully, mine wasn't too badly corroded. So, for example, this was one of the first systems I really worked on back in the day, to be honest. It was one of the first vintage computers I got. But you can see how limited the corrosion is there, for example. Thankfully, that wasn't too bad. But I have had 500 pluses, which have been absolute kind of carnage, really. But after neutralizing, I've got a nice little rotary tool, which is quite, it's almost like a hard rubber that spins really fast, that's hard enough or harsh enough to take off the damaged solder mask, but shouldn't damage the copper underneath. So usually clear back all of the solder mask and then assess any kind of trace damage underneath. Again, thankfully with the A501, I'd recommend cleaning everything back. It's usually, let's see if I can get some pictures up, for example. So like here is my, this is an Acorn Archimedes 3000, which I bought way back when as well. And this was a bit of a nasty, it doesn't look too bad on the face of things, but this is what it looked like underneath the battery. And you can kind of see all that trace corrosion, particularly around, you can actually see where the solder mask has lifted up and the trace corrosion has kind of pushed the solder mask up. So it looks almost like there's a trace still there, but it's actually just the solder mask has lifted because all the copper underneath has been eaten away. So this is what it actually looked like after a clean with white vinegar, which isn't too bad. But you can see, I think my pointer is available on the screen, isn't it there? Yes. So this is what the colour of the solder mask should be. You can typically see if there's been corrosion underneath. Solder mask will get quite dark or potentially kind of still be quite greeny here. So this via here and this trace here as well, those are so dark that it actually indicates that that's actually the printed circuit board underneath where the trace was. So this via is completely gone. This trace is completely gone. This trace is hanging in, the copper's still there, but as you can see, it's quite badly corroded and will be quite difficult to tin. Whereas this kind of piece of trace here looks good. But I'd always recommend any dark patches strip back the solder mask, particularly on vias as well. Vias, if they're tented and they're kind of filled with solder, they usually resist corrosion quite well. Unfortunately, on this version of the Archimedes 3000 mainboard, the vias actually aren't filled. So the problem is here, the alkali actually leaks down inside them and then eats them from the kind of the outside in. So this board ended up needing a lot of fire and trace repairs, which I did manage to get working, thankfully. Here's a different angle, so you can actually see from the kind of the shininess of the copper where this trace is actually completely gone. And there's a few other traces as well, which are kind of particularly identified as suspects. So it's a case of clean up the corrosion, clean back the solder mask where possible, and so that you're able to kind of inspect what damage has occurred, and then plan your repairs to rectify the issue, I guess. So what I did in the case of this Archimedes 3000 was you can actually see where there has been trace damage. Thankfully, I beeped out a lot of stuff and it wasn't too bad. Where there has been trace damage, I've actually ran new wires. This wire was so bad, I've actually run a wire through the battery contact. I think this was for initial testing. I actually reinstalled the battery, but the area ended up having to be taken back apart because it turned out there was a lot more damage. So, for example, I ended up stripping back a lot more of the battery area here, which on the A3000, these are your system ROMs, and then here's the keyboard connectors and the keyboard and mouse interface here. So all of this is really quite critical for the system to work, unfortunately. And the battery is nestled right in amongst it where it can kind of do the most damage. And then here is post-repair, and you can see quite a few more little wires have had to be ran, and via bridges have had to be made. Like these wires are just completely gone. So I've had to run wire through them, solder them to the good copper on the underside of the board, and then solder them to where the trace was originally. So this A3000, it was my first A3000, so I put quite a lot of time and effort into getting it back running again. But after all this work, it was kind of working perfectly again, so that was good. And this is actually written up on my website as well. It was quite thorough. I'll see if I can get that up quickly. So yes, I've actually got quite a thorough detailing of the process in this repair as well, which is kind of what I've just went through there. And it does also, I try and give my advice where possible on the website as well. So recommendations for how to deal with this kind of damage and to kind of go about things and recommending tools as well. So yeah, thank you.
Well, that's make me glad that the damage on the A500 expansion board seems to be limited to that particular board, and you say it's mainly power and ground plane below the battery.
That's right, yes. So hopefully the traces running to all the actual RAM ICs themselves should be okay. I'd recommend inspecting for any blue-green corrosion on the trapdoor connector on the Amiga 500 main board as well. And again, if you need to clean that off with some white vinegar and a toothbrush, that'd be the way to go. Because they're gold plated, they're typically quite resistant to corrosion, but it's still a good idea to if you see any blue-green corrosion to neutralize it and wash it off, definitely.
Yeah, from reading the forums a few years ago, it sounded like an absolute disaster, but from seeing what you've had to deal with, it's a lot worse. You're dealing on main boards with battery on them and having tracks lifting, and what a nightmare.
battery leakage repairs are my least favorite repairs by far. There are so many unknowns is part of the problem as well. Like with most repairs, if you can rely on the main board at least, and you know that maybe something on it's bad, but when there's as much damage as I've just kind of showed, it does get very, very difficult, and that's when you're kind of very much reliant on factory documentation, schematics, and the like to be able to go back to first principles and work through what a problem might be.
Awesome. Just to get back to the chat now, very active chat audience. I know Adam's the guest, but I also want to get the chat in here a bit. oldcomputers.net/ZX80. Yes, I mentioned earlier I wasn't sure of the difference between them. Indeed, the ZX80 was the one I have seen in real life, and a friend of mine had one. The ZX81 I only ever saw in magazines from overseas. But the cool thing is every single magazine I bought in the 80s, because they were imported and so expensive, I've still got them all. So I look forward to digging out those dusty old boxes and looking inside and finding the magic that we used to have reading those magazines in the 80s. What other comments do we have here? So carry on, Adam.
I was just going to say, yes, the ZX80 and ZX81 in particular are very, very interesting and impressive pieces of kit, because they kind of mark the advent of home computing in the UK in particular. So Sinclair being able to introduce an affordable home computer, which was, I guess, in comparison to later computers, it wasn't very capable, but the fact that you could buy a computer for fairly cheap, or you could buy a kit and actually build it yourself, again for even cheaper, that you could plug up to your television at home and is a standalone unit that you can just use with a tape drive or mass storage or what have you, is really, really quite incredible. And that's one of the first kind of stepping stones into us having modern computers that we rely on for work and home today. So it's really nice to be able to take apart and use these very early home computers.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, in contrast to the IBM PC, like 5160, for example, that I showed, whereas that's the complete other end of the spectrum, if you'll pardon the pun, where incredibly high cost, and it's kind of designed for businesses or extreme home users. That was always what a computer was. Whereas with the ZX80 and ZX81 and then later the ZX Spectrum, starting to be able to introduce things into the home. So high volume, kind of low cost, low price, so low profit per unit, versus incredibly high cost but very low volume machines.
Yeah, and like you say, not very capable, but at the time it was magical. Even just to say 4x equals 1 to 50, print x, next x. That, when I discovered if then, wow, the computer can actually think and make decisions. That's incredible. Now, as long as we're playing Snap, I just want to say, remember I zoomed this out for the Amiga 500. This is the size of the ZX Spectrum. I don't have an 80 or an 81, but this is the Spectrum. I got the second hand. Someone seems to have lifted up the fascia and then glued it back again, but that's what you do when you're a kid. Lovely little machine. And I've had a couple of people in the comments mention the microprocessor. If I can find it, there we go. Microprocessor Z80 at study time, and a multi-tech microprocessor with EEPROM programmer. Yes, been there. I have a boxed one here.
Oh well, look at
sideways so you can see the whole thing. And then look at the decor, because that's what you do when you're studying. You put your roses on the table and you have your little pen. Save your programs to cassette. So that's the box. This is the actual microprocessor. Yes, and I spent a lot of time hand assembling Z80 code. That's what it looks like on the inside. You're programming it using hex. And if you look at the CPU, it has a sticker on it. The address bus and the data bus. I drew that so that I could learn better. There's the EEPROM. There's the RAM. Very cool kit. This even prototyping era, which I never used. I'm glad I didn't, because I would have ruined that solder. Yeah, and it had sort of a basic, which I never used, but if you did use the basic keyboard template, you could put over. But I stuck to assembly.
Mm-hmm. That's gorgeous.
Nice to see some other microprocessor people
as well. Very nice. Mm-hmm. I guess that's kind of the old school equivalent of our modern development and evaluation kits for embedded systems, isn't it? Which is very, very cool. It's almost like an Arduino would be, or a Raspberry Pi, nearly.
Yeah. Speaking of the Raspberry Pi, Eben Upton of Raspberry Pi grew up with the Amiga 500 and so forth, and he was building up to, he told me the story, they started with the Raspberry Pi 400, but there's the Raspberry Pi 500 and eventually the Raspberry Pi 500 Plus. This one here has a nice clickety keyboard, and RGB backlit underneath. If I could find a USB cable, no, I can't find one to power it right now.
Does it have 1 meg of RAM?
I think it might have slightly more. Speaking of RAM, you mentioned earlier upgrading your PC. Ari says that he often added the missing DRAM MUX chip 74LS254 to allow 640 kilobyte of DRAM on the motherboard. This was said a while ago, so I'm not sure if you're referring to the PC, but what did you say earlier about 640 kilobytes of RAM, Adam?
Yeah, I think that was for the PC 5160, yes. So there were, for the 5150, 5160, and later there were several different iterations of the main board which supported different amounts of system RAM. So I think the base level was 128K, which the main board on my one will support up to, I think, 512K on board with those kind of modifications. It's 512K extra. It's got kind of a separate bank. It's got the base 128, and then you can add up to 512 on top of that. But I've actually got a little ISA card which came with it, which was pre-populated with 512K. So it already had 640K of RAM, which was neat. So I didn't actually have to modify the main board. I'm not sure how common or uncommon those ISA cards are for them, but that was a very neat little addition. I was lucky that it had that. Oh, that's nice.
An ISA card full of, in fact, I'll put it on the other camera. It seems like each of those chips is a 21256, and there are, I counted 72 of them.
That's insane.
So like RAM must cost a fortune at the time.
I bet RAM was so expensive back in the day. Even in comparison to other electronics, it was so expensive. So that must have cost an absolute fortune. Definitely.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I'm not sure what they used it for because it doesn't have a battery, thank God. So it obviously wasn't a RAM drive, but
yeah,
I guess I could always Google it. It's called a RAM Bank Revision 1. And I picked it up at a salvage. While I'm here anyway, I'll show you this. This one, about a decade ago, I took out the RAM chips to use on a video. I could put them back. It should still work, but it's really just a display and serial port card. Nothing I'm likely to ever use. Monochrome graphic and printer card. Sorry, printer. It's parallel port, not serial. Serial would have been a female connector.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the exact card that was fitted to my IBM PC originally before I upgraded to Hercules card. And one thing, because that's got, again, kind of discrete ICs and like, I'll get a picture up of the Hercules card by comparison. So if I get a picture of what I believe is probably an equivalent to, if not the exact same card as you had there. I'm not sure if yours was the IBM branded one. I think this is the IBM branded one. But as you can see, it's probably early 80s, discrete ICs, big card, full length card. This is the Hercules card, which is actually an upgrade to that. It's actually high resolution. And by comparison, the absolute size of it, because it's got this integrated circuit here, the custom silicon on there basically just takes everything else out of the equation. So the card's about this big instead of like this big. It's really incredible, and that's doing the same, pretty much the same job in the same series of computers. So it's a very good visual representation of. As you can see, this one's copyright 1992 down the bottom there, whereas the other one, I think the chips are dated. We've got a good chip date on here, 1983, early 90, late 82, early 83. Sorry, I was supposed to be showing that. Late 82, early 83. You can see there. So just the size difference. It's a very good visual representation of how. There we go. Yeah, of how.
Mine is not IBM branded, but it's pretty much got the same connectors at the edge. It's image and parallel port. For some reason, they thought those two should go together. Your picture and your printer port.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I was wondering that because it's got the 6845 here is handling the parallel port. It's a PIA, I think. But I thought that was interesting. I guess they must have just assumed back in the day printers were kind of one of the major methods of interfacing with a PC. So I guess they just assumed that everyone would want a display and a printer with each of their setups. So. I've been corrected in the chat. 6845 is the display controller. It's the CRT drive, isn't it? So I can't remember where the parallel chip is. Yeah.
I just realized is that all the chips on here are socketed, except for the ones I needed to salvage. Those, of course, were soldered to the boards. Everything else, the simple glue logic is socketed for some reason. Ari was indeed talking about the IBM PC.
Yeah,
plus he makes the comment that, yes, the Raspberry Pi computers will be retro computers.
That's very true, Sorry, go on.
What I mentioned the click keyboard on the Raspberry Pi. That's also a retro nod. But you mentioned the IBM PC keyboard. I do have a couple of IBM M-style keyboards. I think they came out a little later in the 80s. Damn, they're noisy. And I wonder how people worked in an office full of those. But then I remember what they replaced, which was old school typewriters, a whole different story. Imagine the noise in the office then. They're fun to use, but I can't handle the noise too much.
Yes, definitely. But it's a good point. I really do wonder what computing will look like in even a few years. The acceleration of computing hardware is really very incredible, like absolutely insane. So I guess I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next.
And David points out that £300 for 16K by 8-bit for a RAM chip. That's crazy. That's why the Texas Instruments computer that I've got, for example, believe it or not, in terms of CPU RAM, 256 bytes. You may wonder how you get by on 256 bytes, or Adam, you may not wonder because you're an expert, but the CPU and the ROM just made use of the 256 bytes for basic stuff like registers. Everything else it needed to do, it would ask the video chip to store it in its 16K of RAM. So it slowed things down a hell of a lot, but it saved money on RAM.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, shared memory. Wow.
Ari pointing out that 6845 is the display controller. And it was also pointed out that, also by Ari, that the LPT board was discrete ICs. Yeah, true. In the beginning it was, and later on it wasn't, because you get very large scale integration. And eventually it was just one chip on a card like you showed. Tell you what, I was horrified when I upgraded from my TI with its 256 by 192 graphics in 15 colors. I decided to move into the world of PC, but I didn't have much money. I bought the cheapest one I could get. It was a 386DX40, and even though it only had a monochrome screen, as long as I could just do pixel graphics and draw some lines and stuff, I'd be happy. Got the thing, turned out there were no graphics modes. It was text only monochrome. So shortly after that, I had to get an EGA card, which I still have, once again. Hoarder. I need a mansion to store all my stuff, or a barn like that farmyard that you. But the EGA card was about this big, and like you say, it had RGBI as opposed to the full color CGA modes. Anyway, we could go on all night. We are reaching the bottom of the next hour, so I think I'll call it a day. And I want to put some comments on the screen, even though I got some flack for it earlier. It's just that if I don't show some of these old computers in in the chat. I think we might not be able to access them later after the show. Acer Smith Corona 286. Just before we end, here's a question from Andre, which I've been looking at the whole time. I have an NES that is giving me issues right now. The power light just blinks. I know it's an issue with it seeing the cartridge. I've taken apart and cleaned everything, including the game cartridge itself. Still blinking. Thinking of purchasing a connector cleaner like Deoxit to see if that helps. Trying everything before I look at replacing the 72-pin connector. I've had issues like that I never solved with my computer. It would just lock up, and I wasn't sure if it was the side peripheral port. I cleaned the cartridge port many times. It would just lock up. I still don't have an answer for that. What do you think of Andre's problem, Adam?
It's a good question. I've got a NES myself, which had a very similar issue. It is a common problem. I believe it's a kind of a it's kind of a security in a region lock feature. There's a loop back inside the cartridge which tells the NES that this cartridge installed and excuse me what region the cartridge is, I believe. What I did on mine was to do exactly that. I mean, if you can use a good contact cleaner, I'd definitely recommend that. Deoxit's great. I use WD-40 branded contact cleaner myself. Give the cartridge port a clean out, but be careful not to compress or bend the pins on the kind of the female side. I would clean the cartridge pins, like the gold-plated pins, with, again, contact cleaner and a cotton bud, if you can. I actually ended up replacing the 72-pin connector on my machine, which is actually, it's not even a solder job. It's the port actually fits onto the main board via an edge connector, which is quite nice. So no soldering to replace it, but the quality of the modern made equivalents can be a bit hit and miss. They're no longer gold plated. I think they're zinc plated, and the springiness of the metal is not great. So I don't know whether I did the right thing by replacing the cartridge slot or not. When it comes to my NES, I use an SD card adapter cartridge, so I'm not swapping cartridges all that much. So it seems to be fine for the time being. But from a stress testing point and wear point of view, I can't necessarily recommend a new cartridge slot. But definitely, yeah, good contact cleaner makes a huge difference. It's great for audio pots as well, and just for everything.
Awesome. Yeah, I've even added solder to the cartridge connectors back in the 80s just to try and get it to slot in a bit tighter so it wouldn't slip out. Anyway, Adam, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
It's been a very interesting hour and a half, and I would like to thank you for spending the extra time, because I know you've got stuff to do in your day. Although you are joining us from the UK, so it's about 4:30 p.m. there. It's a different time all over the world from our chat room. And speaking of the chat room, I just want to mention Robert says, greetings from the nice city of Würzburg, which is a great segue to our next show, our next lab talk, which is on the 12th of November. It is in Würzburg, Germany, so they're letting me out so they can clean my cage here so that I can go and join a live show for a change. So please join us on Wednesday, November 12th. It will be at 2 p.m. Central European Time, not our usual 4 p.m., because we will be live. We'll have an audience there at the expert day. So join us, learn how to join Elektor, how to be an Elektor expert, how to earn money from Elektor, and join our vast experts database. And I'm sure I'm going to ask Adam to join our experts database, because if there's one person who knows retro computing, it would be Adam. So once again, thanks to the audience for joining us from around the world. Wherever you are, it's morning somewhere, it's evening, it's afternoon. So have a great morning, evening, or afternoon. And thanks once again to Adam for joining us, and have a good night. And signing off, cheers.
Thank you very much for having me, Brian, and thank you to everyone in the chat. Much appreciated. I had a lot of fun.